Snapping out of a daydream of a warm, lush field, Thor finds himself surrounded by corpses. It's the Battle of Jörungavágr, 987 AD. Multiple longships battle on the raging sea. Thor and his comrade Thorkel brutally cut down countless enemy forces. Thor tells Thorkel he's going ahead to stop the enemy, slaughtering everyone that comes his way. Suddenly, he gets distracted. An arrow hits his shoulder. He wrestles a soldier. Both fall into the sea. Grabbing the man's sword from its hilt, Thor makes quick work of him. Now, having second thoughts, Thor drops the sword. It sinks to the bottom of the sea as he swims towards land, leaving the battle without turning back. In Iceland, 15 years later in 1002 AD, a young boy, Thorfinn, and his sister Ylva, Thor's children, go about their daily chores. That night, Leif Erikson tells a group of children the story of how he sailed to the new continent, claiming it was warmer and more fertile, a land without war or slaves. They even make friends with the natives, receiving a headdress and a tobacco pipe as gifts. He names the new continent Vinland. That night, a frail-looking man with a collar and a broken chain trudges through the snow towards the village. While shoveling snow with her father the next morning, Ilda falls off the roof. She uncovers something buried by their front door, the man with the collar. Leif warns Thorfinn about how dangerous the sea is. His ship once got stuck in an ice floe, but the ship wasn't the only thing he left behind. The whole crew perished while walking across the frozen water. Leif goes on to tell the story of how their ancestors fled King Harald after his conquest of Norway. Thorfinn refuses to believe his ancestors would run away. Rushing to ask his father about Leif's story, he finds Thor's reviving the escaped slave. Suddenly, someone bursts through the door, explaining that Halfdan has shown up at their port, looking for an escaped slave. Barging into their home, Halfdan demands Thor's return the slave, to which Thor offers to buy him instead, for 4 times the amount he paid. Despite their best efforts, the slave dies. A warship sails towards the town. Thor hasn't completely let go of his past, as his equipment still sits in a chest hidden in the family's home. A Viking settlement in Northumbria, England, is attacked on November 13, 1002 AD. The English strike while they bathe, slaughtering them, sparing no one, not even the women and children. Back in Iceland, the children of the village battle with wooden weapons. Leif shows up to tell Thorfinn, who died early on during the game, that he's leaving to trade in Norway. Looking towards the horizon, Leif notices a warship approaching the village, telling Thorfinn to warn his father. They request to speak with Thor the Troll. Making his way to the dock, Thor addresses the soldiers as Vikings and asks for their leader Floki. Apparently, King Sweyn's sister was one of the victims, giving him a good excuse to wage war on England. Despite being a deserter, the leader of the Vikings, Sigvaldi, is willing to forgive Thor if he returns to Jomsborg and fights in the war. If Thor refuses, however, he's forcing his hand because he jeopardizes the entire village's safety. Some of the children eavesdrop, and the older boys in the village become excited for their first chance to fight on the battlefield. Leif tells the kids that the Vikings are the strongest army in the north. Returning to his ship, Floki introduces himself to the village, explaining that his task is to recruit the hero Thor Snorreson and anyone who chooses to follow him into battle. They will send a warship for Thor to command in the coming weeks. Despite feigning his own death, he wasn't able to escape after 15 years on the run. Thorfinn beats up the village kids, injuring them while they play war. Angry that he can't sail with the others, he discards his wooden sword to look for a real blade. Finding the chest with Thor's old gear in it, Thorfinn, mesmerized by his old dagger, doesn't notice his father until Thor grabs it by the blade. Thor explains that swords are for killing people. Asking his son who he was going to kill, Thorfinn replies that he was going to kill the enemy. Thor tells him that he doesn't have any enemies, that no one has enemies. Thorfinn runs out of the house, calling his father a liar. Floki and his troop of Vikings visit the Faroe Islands to speak with Askeladd, the leader of a group of Vikings, pirates. Floki offers 5 pounds of gold. All Askeladd and his men have to do is kill Thor. Askeladd wonders why Floki doesn't kill him himself, asking for double what Floki offers. Floki tries to intimidate him, claiming Askeladd is in no position to negotiate. A spear flies into the tent, killing the Viking hiding behind the tapestry. Taken by surprise, Floki accepts his counteroffer. Thors decides to take only 5 of the young men from their village on their journey with him and Leif. One of the young women sending them off worries about Ari, until Leif explains that they won't even see a battlefield. He plans to bring them back to the village after he finishes trading in Norway. Thors says goodbye to his family, but can't find Thorfinn. He begins to tell Helga something, but can't find the words. They both understand, but leave it unspoken. Using a giant-sized oar, Thors takes one side of the ship, while the 5 young men row on the other, barely able to keep up. Once they are far enough to use the sails, Thors agrees that it's too late to turn back now. It takes a second before realizing that Thorfinn was the one who asked the question. Thors is not happy, but can't help but smile when Thorfinn jumps out of a barrel to relieve himself, struck by the beauty of the ocean. In the Faroe Islands, Askeladd and his crew prepare for the job, reasoning that Floki is hiding something. This isn't an execution, it's an assassination. That night, Leif tells them to change course, noticing the wind change. Thors tells Ari, a young suitor with a crush on Ylva, eager to become a warrior, about his daughter. Thors tells him about her birth, while he was still a Viking, and how it made him fear battle. Now that he had something to live for, he decided to leave the battlefield forever. The crew makes it to the Faroe Islands to stop, rest, and resupply. As they sail through a narrow pass with cliffs on either side, both Leif and Thors get a bad feeling. They decide to turn back. Before they make it out, rubble and broken beams careen off the side of the cliff, where Askeladd's men lie in wait. They're trapped. Knowing they're no match for 2 ships full of men, Thors sighs and retrieves his sword from the chest. He hands Thorfinn his dagger, telling him to only use it to defend himself. With that, Thors leaps onto one of their ships and starts knocking men out left and right without even drawing his sword. Thors continues to effortlessly beat members of Askeladd's crew with his bare hands. Even Bjorn, second in command, who's in a blind rage after consuming a berserker mushroom, doesn't stand a chance. The other ship attempts to board Thors when Bjorn's unconscious body flies towards them, breaking one of the gangplanks, quickly followed by Thors jumping back to his ship. Drawing his sword, destroying the other gangplank, he threatens the entire crew. They either give up and leave, or they all die. To protect the kids, Thors identifies the leader, Askeladd, challenging him to a duel. If he wins, they leave him alone. If Askeladd can beat him, he can take what he wants. He accepts. But before they start, Thorfinn throws a tantrum, revealing his identity as Thor's son. Askeladd cuts the rope on the mast, dropping the sail as a distraction to get a surprise attack. Too shallow, the cut barely scratches Thor's. Askeladd is able to block his attacks. Noticing his sword is in bad shape, thinking Thor's is trying to destroy it, he tries to break Thor's sword first, but it's all going according to plan. Thor's sword breaks and Askeladd swings wide, finding himself disarmed with his own sword at his neck, falling for Thor's trap. Askeladd asks why he wasted his talents as a master warrior for 15 years, to which Thors explains he isn't a true master because a true warrior doesn't need a sword. When Askeladd asks him to become the leader of his group, no one laughs when he says he was joking. When Bjorn wakes up and screams, this isn't the time to be joking around, suddenly jumping onto Thor's ship, taking Thorfinn hostage. Askeladd refuses to honor the duel despite losing, and Thors refuses to kill him. But as soon as Askeladd looks like he'll do the honorable thing, he signals for his archers on the cliff to fire, littering Thor's body with arrows. Without flinching, Thors calmly asks Askeladd to honor his promise, and tells Leif to bring his head to the leader of the Vikings, then turns to Bjorn, demanding that he release his son. Askeladd is surprised to find that none of his crew died. They take one of their ships, but they notice Thorfinn stowed away on it. Screaming and cursing them, he vows to kill Askeladd and avenge his father. The pirates become restless while sailing to the meeting place to receive payment for Thor's assassination. Assuming Thorfinn died from thirst or starvation, they don't bother to check on him. Upon leaving the boat, Thorfinn witnesses the pirates raid a village, leaving no one alive. He sneaks into Askeladd's room, but is unable to kill the man in his sleep, saying he would never do something so cowardly. So the next day, he challenges Askeladd to a duel instead. A kick to the stomach resulted in an almost instant loss. Starving and alone, Thorfinn attempts to survive in the wild, growing weaker by the day. Back in Iceland, Leif returns with Thor's chest, with all his belongings intact. Well, almost. The sword remains in two pieces, the blade separated from the hilt. Leif swears he will find Thorfinn regardless of how many years it may take. Ylva refuses to show her grief, distracting herself with chores and work until Hilda tells her it's enough. She needs to rest and can't hide from her feelings forever. Hilda breaks down in her mother's arms. Thorfinn continues surviving in the woods, practicing using a sword, obsessed with revenge. One night, while scraping marrow out of bones, a wolf appears. Thorfinn hears the advice Askeladd gave him echoing in his head. Don't let the sword swing him around. He pulls out his father's dagger and kills the wolf as it lunges at him. Trying to hunt rabbits, Thorfinn realizes he can throw the knife instead of trying to catch them hunting on foot. As the pirates get ready to sail, Thorfinn appears out of the woods, challenging Askeladd to another duel. Thorfinn is promised his duel if he can achieve something on the battlefield. He ends up joining the pirates on their voyage. The Vikings were seafaring pirates and raiders, but after the English attacked Viking settlers in 1002 AD, they were hired to help the Danish army invade England. Askeladd and his Vikings, with Thorfinn in tow, arrive in the vicinity of Gainsborough, near the center of England, to find the remnants of a battle. Seeing so many bodies, along with the stench of the rotting corpses, causes Thorfinn to lose his stomach. Askeladd and Bjorn speak with a Danish soldier about a job, coming to an agreement for the 5 pounds of gold. As soon as the deal is done, an arrow pierces the soldier's neck from behind. They're surrounded. Thorfinn is taken by surprise as a soldier tackles him to the ground, only to be saved by Askeladd, who tells him the weak die first on the battlefield. Thorfinn goes into a rage and kills his first man. After that, he joins the Vikings, becoming more and more adept with his knife as the years pass. He begins to dual-wield daggers as his weapons of choice. On a scouting mission, he becomes injured and is found by an older Englishwoman and her daughter, who take him in. He reluctantly accepts their generosity. A soldier comes looking for a kid pirate, becoming suspicious after seeing Thorfinn. The older woman covers for him. Picking up a log from the fire, Thorfinn tells them both to run. Lighting a building on fire to signal the Vikings, the older woman follows him. Feeling guilty upon seeing her disappointment, he tries to save the villagers, telling them to run. He has a flashback to when his family was together, but there was nothing he could do. King Sweyn orders his troops to retreat and rest for the winter. Without steady work, Askeladd and his Vikings travel to France near the Loire River, where 2 clans are at war. One lays siege to a fort that backs up onto a river, but they cannot take the fort by attacking the front gate alone. Askeladd sends Thorfinn to send a message to the attacking army, offering to help take the fort for half the spoils. Still bent on revenge, Askeladd promises Thorfinn a duel if he can bring him a head with a helmet. Thorfinn seals the deal with the army and sends the signal. The next day, the army's leaders think Thorfinn lied, until the Vikings show up, carrying their longships across land, avoiding the waterfall upstream. Thorfinn notices the fort's leader, a head with a helmet. Jumping across the moat, he cuts down the soldiers on the ramparts, cutting off the commander's head with one strike. He dives into the moat after the head as it falls off the ramparts. The army finally breaks down the front gate, only to find all the soldiers in the fort already dead. The treasure store is completely empty. The Vikings sail away laughing, until a head is thrown on board, with Thorfinn close behind. He challenges Askeladd, but the duel will have to wait. First, they have to escape the Franks. The Vikings return to their village with enough loot to last through the winter. Thorfinn finally has another chance to duel with Askeladd. Thorfinn goes on the offensive and quickly attacks, while Askeladd tries to casually make small talk. Bjorn is impressed by his improvement over the past few years. Thorfinn barely misses his chance, but Askeladd knows how to make him mad. Bringing up his father makes him quickly lose focus. Blinded by rage, he charges and quickly loses the duel. Thorfinn decides to stay as a lookout on the boat for the night, where he imagines his father reminding him that he has no enemies, and to let the idea of revenge go. Askeladd's uncle's slave startles him. He tells her of a place without slaves or war, where no one would be able to find her. King Sweyn is adamant about bringing his youngest son Canute to conquer England, despite his caretaker Ragnar protesting. There's only one problem. Capturing London Bridge. Askeladd and his crew arrive to help take London. Bjorn asks him what his plan is. He doesn't really have one. His only idea is to send Thorfinn to kill Thorkel, a Dane who is fighting for the English. Floki and his Vikings approach the bridge and try to offer Thorkel a better deal if he returns to their side to fight against the English. Thorkel doesn't care which side he's on, as long as his opponents are tough. He knows the English are weak and losing the war, so fighting against them wouldn't be any fun. He throws a giant boulder at Floki's ship, laughing as they retreat. The Danes attempt to cut through the support beams until Thorkel begins throwing logs, taking out whole ships by himself. Then Thorfinn shows up, jumping off the mast of Askeladd's ship onto the bridge. Thorfinn dodges, cutting Thorkel's wrist. Assessing his weak points, Thorfinn goes low, kicking the back of his knee. Thorkel is wide open, but he uses his hand to stop Thorfinn's blade and begins to throw Thorfinn around. Askeladd receives the signal to retreat. Thorfinn plays dead until he gets his chance to strike, cutting off the tips of Thorkel's ring and pinky finger on his right hand, the same one he stabbed. Thorkel asks his name before Thorfinn jumps into the water to escape, surprised to find out that he is the son of Thor's, obviously recognizing the name. King Sweyn decides to move on from London, leaving only 4,000 men under the control of his son Canute, who has no experience in battle. Thorfinn makes his way to the riverbank with a dislocated shoulder, a sprained ankle, and a few broken ribs. Seeing the Danes retreat, Thorkel's men believe they've won, to his dismay, angrily challenging them to come back and fight. Askeladd assumes Thorfinn is dead, but to his surprise, he limps out of the forest, finding the rest of the men. They continue on towards Wessex in search of riches to last the winter. Thorkel hurls boulders at the prince's men in frustration since they refuse to attack. Upon finding out the Prince of Denmark was there, his face lit up, grinning ear to ear. Thorfinn has another dream about his family in a bright, warm field. His father tells him to forget about revenge again. The dream quickly turns into a nightmare. Thorfinn wakes up screaming, wondering where that warm place with rolling hills and open fields is. Unable to sleep, he walks up a hill to find some ruins. The men are getting restless, looting poor villages and being separated from the army. A fight breaks out amongst the men, leading to a duel to death. Askeladd sits amongst the ruins on the top of the hill, unable to sleep like Thorfinn, who makes it clear they are not friends when Askeladd tries to start a conversation. Askeladd tells him about the Romans, who conquered England and left the ruins there 500 years ago, before the Saxons came. Now the Danes are conquering the Saxons. Askeladd summons him to inform him that the army has moved north, leaving Canute in the south. According to the messenger, Thorkel defeated the army in London and is headed north with 500 of his closest followers to catch up to the main forces. The messenger tells them that Thorkel captured Prince Canute, saying he's going to ask for reinforcements while Bjorn and the crew look to Askeladd on how to proceed. In an unexpected turn of events, Askeladd beheads the messenger. He rallies his crew by announcing that they will save the prince without any backup and claim the reward for themselves. Thorkel's forces march as the leaves begin to fall. Winter is on its way. Ragnar argues with Thorkel, and suddenly the priest begins to panic, saying he sees God. Ragnar tells the men to get him some booze. They debate which religion's gods are better, asking the priest, Canute's teacher. He responds, whichever one created booze, to the amusement of the men. The men stop. Thorkel throws a spear. It's a hit, straight through one of the soldiers lying in wait. The ambushers boast they have 2,000 men, so they should hand over the prince and give up. Thorkel agrees to let Ragnar, the priest, and Canute go, but starts egging the king's forces on. Throwing insult after insult, the men become enraged and refuse to allow them to go unanswered. They charge. Not far from the skirmish, Askeladd and his men wait for them to start fighting. As soon as they hear the sounds of battle, they start emptying barrels of oil and set the forest on fire, creating a circle of flames to trap and confuse both sides. Askeladd calls for Thorfinn to be covered in water and sent through the blaze on horseback to retrieve the prince. Thorkel's men surround Ragnar and the prince when a burning horse flies between them. Thorfinn jumps off, claiming he's there to save the prince, ignoring Ragnar's skepticism. When Thorfinn is about to cut down Thorkel's men, he shows up, happy to see Thorfinn. He waves and asks him a few questions. If his father's name is really Thor's, he guesses his mother's name is Helga. Thorfinn is taken by surprise when he continues to praise his father, a true warrior. The flames spread, separating them from Thorfinn and the prince's entourage, who rendezvoused with Askeladd's crew. Ragnar has no choice but to thank them and rest the prince's safety in their hands. Askeladd has only one request: to see Canute's face. Everybody gasps when the prince removes his helmet, saying he looks more like a princess than a prince. Askeladd finds an old man fishing, claiming he's a ferryman since the fish are already hibernating. He notes that Askeladd's English accent sounds like someone from his country. He notices Askeladd's armor while he requests a message to be sent across the water to one of the elders. The boatman seems to understand and accepts the request. The ear, one of Askeladd's crew members who has exceptional hearing, says he hears soldiers and horses about one day's march behind them. Thorkel's men are catching up quick. Suddenly, the ear hears scouts on the hill. Their position is compromised, but Askeladd is confident that they will escape their pursuers, despite Ragnar's protest. During the night, Bjorn approaches Askeladd about the men's worry, noticing a change in his demeanor ever since he saw the prince's face. Askeladd explains how he's been living with criminals for 40 years and can tell a lot by looking at someone's face. He says the prince doesn't have the face of a king. Back on the road, the ear warns the crew that Thorkel's men are right on their heels, but Askeladd isn't worried. Their reinforcements are waiting for them with a ship. Carrying them across the Severn River to Wales, a harsh, infertile land divided into different kingdoms after the fall of the Roman Empire, they escape pursuit for now. Askeladd claims that Wales is his ally, and if Ragnar is so concerned, then Thorfinn will be their personal bodyguard, promising a duel as a reward when they reach Gainsborough. Gratianus, a commander and friend of Askeladd, tells them he's only helping them if the prince is willing to sign a pact of non-aggression with Wales, after conquering England, of course. Two messengers from Breheniog appear farther down the road, but the ear sends Bjorn to warn Askeladd that they are surrounded. Thorfinn perks up as well, noticing archers on the hills on either side of the road. Thorkel is still in pursuit. King Sweyn sits in front of an army of Jomsvikings, preparing for invasion in the spring. Leif Erikson arrives in England, disheartened to see a boy who looks like Thorfinn being sold as a slave, still on his decade-long search. Arrows fly from the hillside, piercing the head of Askeladd's horse, killing it and throwing him off. Standing, Thorfinn brandishes a shield, ready to protect the wagon's other passengers, Canute, Ragnar, and the drunken priest. That's the end of part 1. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.